This is a revision video for improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, the cognitive interview. And if you look at that picture of that brain there doing its weights, it's basically saying the cognitive interview is going to make your brain work harder and smarter in order to unlock memories that either you didn't know were there or to generally improve the accuracy of the eyewitness testimony that you're giving. So it means that the police would use the cognitive interview to talk to eyewitnesses, to uncover more memories and to make sure the memories are accurate. So there are four elements to the cognitive interview. The first is called context reinstatement, and this is where witnesses will be asked to visualize themselves back at the scene of the crime and perhaps recall what they can see, maybe what the weather was like, what they were doing and feeling. And the reason that this will enhance memory is because context and state-dependent cues that were encoded at the same time as the crime, as witnessing the crime, will trigger memories. So this is to do with the encoding specificity principle that we looked at earlier in the unit when we looked at forgetting. So when you witness a crime, you are unwittingly, unknowingly encoding all sorts of contextual cues and also state-dependent ones, like how you feel. And so when you go back and either go back to the scene of the crime or mentally visualize yourself back there, those will act as cues and trigger memories. The next element is called report everything. Be careful with that one. A lot of people put recall everything, but it isn't. It's report everything. And that's where a witness is asked to recall the crime from start to finish, including all details, even if they seem irrelevant and without interruption. And this enhances recall or improves accuracy because of something called the domino effect. So as you are recalling one memory, it will act as a trigger for the next memory and the next memory and so on. And the reason that the no interruptions will help enhance recall is because if you think about dominoes, like with one memory triggering another and another and another, if you stop it, then none of the other dominoes will fall over. So if you stop somebody's recall at their witness as they're talking, then you're kind of blocking all the rest of those memories. The third element is called recall from changed perspective, and this means that witnesses are asked to report the episode as it would be seen from different viewpoints. So after they've recalled everything that they saw, they are asked to imagine themselves in a different point of view and recall the crime. So I always say that imagine you were at a bus stop when you witnessed a crime, then you might imagine that you were sitting on the bus. And the reason that this improves accuracy is because the first reason it's really hard to do, and that means that you've got to concentrate really hard, which can improve memory. But the second reason is that it blocks schemas from interfering with what witnesses would expect to see. So our perception is sometimes distorted and our memory by schemas. Our schemas, as you might know, are those packets of knowledge of information about the world. And sometimes what we expect to see, we would report that rather than what we actually did see. And so this difficult task blocks the schemas from interfering with our real memories. The fourth element is called recall in reverse order. And so simply the person is asked to report the incident moving backwards and forwards in time. So they might start at the end of the crime and work their way backwards to the beginning, and then they could get asked to kind of recall forwards and backwards. And this enhances recall for exactly the same reason as recall from changed perspective. If you're one of my students, you can probably download this summary sheet. It's good to fill it in. It's got all the elements. It's quite colourful, and so you can describe each element and then you can say how it enhances recall. So ask me if you can't find where to download it. And if you're not one of my students, I'll put a link into the description below. The key study for the cognitive interview is by Geiselman. You don't need to know his name, he's not on the spec, but Geiselman et al. Asked participants to view a film of a violent crime, and then 48 hours later they were interviewed by a police officer using one of the three following interviews. So it was done in Los Angeles, so it was either a standard interview used by the LA police, or a hypnosis interview, or third, the cognitive interview. So obviously this is going to be an independent groups design because otherwise you'd have the practice effect with the recall of memory. So they only were given one of the different interviews. And the results are that the mean number of correctly recalled facts for each condition was the cognitive interview is the most at 41.2, the hypnosis interview came second at 38.0, and the standard interview came way down at 29.4. And if you want to practice your research methods, you could put those details into a correct graph, because remember, on any paper you could get asked any research methods questions, so if you want to have a practice you could put those details in a graph, and that will also maybe help you recall the number of correctly recalled facts. So the conclusion was the cognitive interview led to better memory for events. There is something called the enhanced cognitive interview, and you could maybe use this for AO1 or AO3, but it was just the enhanced interview recognised that police officers lacked the necessary social skills to use the cognitive interview effectively, and so the enhanced cognitive interview added social and communication skills to the training of the interviewers. Now you don't need to remember all of them, but you might want to just pick a couple out, and even if you've got a 16 marker on this, for your AO1, I would outline the 4 elements, how they enhance recall, and put the key study. I wouldn't necessarily bother with this part at this stage. It's only if you've got a particular question about how to, like the enhanced cognitive interview, you would use this information. So the evaluation points, the first ones are a criticism and its methodological issues with that key study by Geiselman. So if you remember, the people were asked to watch a video of a violent crime, and this was back in 1985, so it's not going to be flat screen TVs and like feeling like you're in the room. It would have been, you know, big chunky telly with a video recorder. So the but the key study lacked external validity because they weren't asked to watch a real crime, because obviously for ethics. So the task was quite different to watching a real crime. The artificial setting would have impacted differently on them, and so witnesses who would see a real crime, then they're likely to have high anxiety, and recall may have been very different in all 3 conditions of the IV. So that lack of external validity is a methodological issue. We're now going to look at research into the effectiveness of the cognitive interview. So the first thing is a thumbs up. It's saying strength is that a meta-analysis of 53 studies found an increase of 34% of correct information compared to the standard police interview. Now that's good because it gives police a greater chance of successful investigations, and that's a benefit. The second one is by someone called Konken et al. Now Konken sounds like conker, and I've got a picture of 2 conkers there, and I want you to imagine that first conker, the bigger one at the front with 81% written on it, and the smaller one at the back with 61% on it. And hopefully that will act as a memory to trigger your recall, that Konken found that while it generated more detailed correct information, so an increase of 81%, it also increased the amount of incorrect information by 61%. So I imagine those like conkers smashing into each other, just like a visual cue. So although this is evidence for and against it, obviously as strength it's increased information by 81%, but the findings limits the effectiveness of the cognitive interview because it indicates that police might waste time investigating false information. There was a survey of real police officers by Kebbel and Wagstaff, and they did a survey of UK police, and they found that they often only use the context reinstatement and report everything sections, and that the full enhanced interview often took too long. They also found it could generate lots of incorrect information. However, overall, they found it very useful. Now, this is a good evaluation because it's of real police officers in the UK, and it does lead on from that other research that it's effective, but you could get more incorrect information. And actually, what they found is that you don't need everything. And that leads on to the next part, the next evaluation, is that not all the components are necessary. So a strength of the cognitive interview is that Milne and Bull found that all components were effective in producing more accurate eyewitness testimony. So that is a strength to start with, that it was helpful. However, they also found that a combination of just using context reinstatement and report everything produced better recall than all the other conditions. Using just these 2 components to generate eyewitness testimony would be helpful in reducing the time and training needed to complete the cognitive interview. So that follows on from that survey that they just tended to use context reinstatement and report everything. And it's saying that although it's useful, you don't actually need all of those components. Now, the reason I've got a picture of that beautiful Hereford bull there with his horns is for a memory peg. I want you to imagine that bull charging at a mill, because it was Millman bull, but we'll imagine it's a mill, so a big windmill. And as that bull charges at the mill and hits it, the two elements, change perspective and reverse order, fly out the back because they're just not necessary. But the other two stand firm, you know, they're still there. And that might help you recall that evaluation point. The last evaluation is that there are individual differences in the effectiveness of the cognitive interview. And there's a picture there of a much older woman. And this is because older people often lack confidence in their memories due to negative stereotypes. However, the cognitive interview overcomes this issue by encouraging reporting all events, no matter how small or trivial. And that research found that that gave older people more confidence, and actually research found that older people had significantly enhanced recall compared to the standard interview, and more so than younger participants. So this strategy was actually helping overcome their lack of confidence, and that they could let go of those negative stereotypes, and it encouraged all those details, so it gave them much better recall. So I've given you some revision in, just giving you all the information about the cognitive interview, and what you need to do now is some revision out to make it effective. So revision out is where you do exam questions, past papers, marking past papers, all that hard stuff. I've put some retrieval questions, which are not exam style questions, but will help you really think about the whole cognitive interview. So I've put, and also for research methods as well, which could come up. So you could pause the video on these retrieval questions and these retrieval questions as well and answer those. But make sure that you do practice like exam style questions as well. So you'll find those in your textbook. They're often called can you questions, or you could look up some questions from past papers. And those are the picture references.